Hey, what's up? Chicago and I back again, and we're ready to go ahead and tear into another video series in the pop, another server drop series. And that's where I kind of go over some red teamish, purple teamish type of activities where I'm using a capture the flag environment to kind of demonstrate it, but I don't speed run, a capture the flag video kind of deal. I kind of break down, all the elements of why we're doing it, how it's happening, those sort of things. So today we're going to go over one called DNS manipulation, and I typically use the Try Hack Me rooms because I really like them. I like how they're structured. But there's some other ones out there like Hack the Box and stuff that are really good as well. This particular one I really like. The person, whoever made this, made some great scripts for what we're going to do. So we're going to use this one here today. So let's talk a little bit about this DNS manipulation. So they start off the room here by just giving an introduction to DNS. And if you're not familiar with DNS, it's mapping a name to an IP address. If I were to ask, hey, what's Leroy Jenkins? Where's LeroyJenkins.com, right? Now, there's an IP address associated with it. And if you remember all the IP addresses of all the websites you go to, well, you're super awesome. But I don't remember those. It's easier for me to just say LeroyJenkins.com, which would be a fully qualified domain name in this case here. And DNS will map that name to an IP address. So it's easier for people to just type the name in, and then it will, ask this server out in the nether regions there, hey, where is this particular domain? Give me the IP address for it so I can communicate with it. So typically on your computer, you'll have on your NIC card, you'll have a DNS server that you'll communicate with. And if it's, your home computer, it's probably like your ISP has a DNS server that you use. And so your computer will say, hey, LeroyJenkins.com. It will look like, depending on if you're using like Windows, for instance, Windows has like a host file where it will check, and then there's a DNS cache that it will check, but don't worry about any of that. Essentially, we get to the point where we say, I don't know the answer of where LeroyJenkins.com is, so I need to ask somebody, and that somebody is a DNS server. So your request goes out in the form of a record, like an A, they call it an A record in this case here. You're asking for an A record from LeroyJenkins.com, but you need to find it first. So you ask the DNS server that is assigned to whatever your NIC card is. You say, hey, player, where's LeroyJenkins.com? And they say, well, I don't really know the answer to that because I don't host that record, but I can tell you where com is, and com would be what they call a top-level domain. And so you have like com and net and org. You've heard of those probably. So they'll say, well, let me go ask them. So that DNS server will then go ask com, the server that hosts com, and say, hey, player, you got some Leroy Jenkins there record in your server? And let's just say they do. Then that DNS server will respond back and say, yeah, I have LeroyJenkins.com. It's at blah, blah, blah IP address. It'll send that answer back to the DNS server, which in turn will send it back to you and your computer, and therefore your computer can connect directly to it. Pretty awesome stuff. How this is being used by bad guys is in the fact that a lot of big companies out there may not block this traffic or may not even monitor this traffic for malicious activity. Case in point is if you work for a company and you decided to be bad and exfil data out to a server you run. That's bad, and companies don't like that, and they typically have measures in place to detect that and try to block it. They typically will use like maybe a DLP, right, data loss prevention tool, but they'll also go ahead and proactively block known exfil type of ports like 22 for SSH, things like that. So they may already block that stuff for you, but what they won't block more than likely is DNS, because everybody has to query DNS. They have to go to web pages for their work and stuff. So that's one that's, it's really important that we understand that this is a big gap, a big security gap in our companies, is that if we're not monitoring it properly for malicious activity, some of this stuff can actually happen. So today we're going to go into the exfiltration of data and also infill of data, and then maybe we'll also get a little bit into tunneling as well. So let's go down through here. So it's just asking you to click yes and all this other stuff. And then they have this installation here where you have to go to this site and grab these other things. I'm not going to use the iodine one in here. I'm going to probably use like DNSCat 2 because I like that one. That one's pretty cool. But this one here also utilizes T-Shark, which is a way to capture a PCAP file. and monitor the traffic that's happening. So I already have that on my server that I'm going to be running, so I think we're pretty good to go there. Let's see. Then we have custom public DNS servers. Okay, so this one, they have some servers that they've set up, I think, for this video, but I've already set mine up. So I have this domain that I use for this testing sort of thing, and we're going to be using it today. And I've already created them ahead of time, so I don't spend a lot of time creating them and wasting time on video. But I have this intelbytes.com that I own here, and I would recommend probably using Google domains because they make it really easy to just modify and add custom records and things like that. So we'll be actually, making custom records for this particular one. So pretty cool stuff. All right, so again, they go into what is DNS. We talked about that already. So let's scroll down a little bit here. Okay, so this is an interesting one to do right here. It says if you're on a Windows, what command would you use? And actually, you can do this on Linux as well, I believe. If you're on Windows, what command would you use to query a TXT record for YouTube.com? So if you were to look up, different records for DNS, so if you say DNS TXT record, you'll see that this one here is a record that holds information about the domain. So it holds text information. It's not as common as some of the other records that we would see, like pointer records and A records and things like that. And so this will be one that we'll talk about later about what you want to monitor for. So in this case, you can use the nslookup command, and then you do -type equals txt youtube.com. And I think you can also do that, if I'm not mistaken, on I think it's the same commands. You can use dig when you use Linux, but I think you can also do it here for this. So type equals txt, and then we said, what was it, youtube.com, I think it was. Yeah, so I mean, it'll work the same way on Linux as well. But their other question is, how would I do it specifically for Linux? And the dig command is not actually used in Windows, but it is used in Linux. So to do the same type of thing for Facebook.com in this case, you would say dig facebook.com txt. So really good stuff there. Quad A is just another record if you have an IPv6 address. So for IP version 4 addresses, you're going to be getting an A record back for it. So, LeroyJenkins.com, whatever the IP4 address is of that, the answer I'll get back will be in the form of an A record. If it was an IPv6 address that I was pulling back, it would be Quad A there. Maximum characters for a DNS TXT record is 256, yay or nay. That is nay. It's actually a lot larger than that for the TXT records, which makes it handy for bad guys to use for what we're going to do here today. But it's not much more, I don't believe, than 256. What DNS record provides a domain name in reverse lookup? And this is what they call a PTR record. And you would see it in a specific format where if the address in question was, let's go to my address here for my one here. So like here, 142.93.251.196, it would actually be in reverse. So it would say 196.251.93.142. I think it's .inaddr, something to that effect. And that's what they would call a reverse lookup. In other words, you know the IP, now you're trying to map it to a domain or whatever. So yeah, you can do that. Oh, here it is. I probably should have just read further. So that's what it would look like in this particular case for reverse lookup. So it looks kind of odd. All right, let's talk about exfiltration. So again, we're running the assumption here that we are compromised. We compromised a victim, and we need to find a way to exfil data out. Now, like I said, if you compromise the victim in a company, there may be blocks in place or tooling that will detect you trying to exfil data out. So if you're a ransomware group, that's kind of the hotness now, is extortion. So they're going to want to compromise a machine, and they're not really concerned about encrypting it. They just want to exfil the data out. How do we do that without being detected and without being blocked? One way is using DNS or using these TXT records. So in this particular case, the thing to remember is the actual length of a DNS name here. It says, what is the maximum length? And it is actually 253 because the length also includes any dots that you include in it, right? So The maximum length will be 253. So keeping that in mind, if I'm exfilling a large text document, you're going to be generating a lot of A records, and they're going to be these really long names in the records. That right there should just trigger, if you're monitoring properly, that should trigger something saying, hey, this is suspicious. Hundreds of these, weird long records happening to the same IP or same domain at the same time. And we'll get into some detection methods a little bit later on. So down here, they go into the actual DNS exfiltration demo. So if you go to the GitHub site for this particular person's Try Hack Me, you can do a git clone, and it has these different scripts here. So we're going to be actually using that. So I'm going to go over to my command prompt here. So I've already done a git clone for it. And so you can see right here, I have all of the different ones. And these are from some other ones I've also done before. So our goal in this first one here is to exfil this data. So let's take a look at it first. So we'll say cat securecore.txt. And we can see it's a bunch of credit cards, and they assured me on the website that these aren't legit. These are just fake, but regardless, these are some data that you don't want, as a company, you don't want being exfilled out. But this is what we're going to try to exfil out. As you can see, it's got a good amount of information. So to do what we want to do, we're going to have to do some encoding so that we can fit it in that little limit of how big a domain is. So we're going to have to do some encoding, and the actual script that this person uses, I believe, does a base 64 encode, and then it does a base 58 encode as well to make it ready for travel, as it were, in DNS. So let's see if that's the case. I think it's packety.py. Yes. So whenever you execute this script, it's going to ask for a file name, and this would be the file. In our case, it would be securecore.txt that you're trying to get out. And then the domain name. This is the one that you're going to put in the domain name. Now, they have the one listed here, so I'm not going to use theirs because I don't know if it's still active or whatever, but I'm going to use my own. And I would recommend, just for your sake of testing it, just register a Google domain. If it's not well known and it's not used, they're probably like, $10 a year or something like that. So go ahead and register a domain so that you can actually utilize something like this. And you'll see here, the code starts off by reading from the text file. And if you watch my previous video on Ransom Watch, then you'll see that I kind of break down how to do it. And we're not going to get into a Python class in this one, but it's essentially using the ability of Python to read in the actual text documents. So once it does that, then it will do a base 64 encode of that information. So all of the information from securecore.txt, it will base 64 encode, and then it will base 58 encode it after that. And then to give it a little bit more craziness with it, it'll actually add 3 dummy characters added to it to give it some more obfuscation. One of the characters will be prepended to whatever the encoded string is, and then 2 characters will be appended. So in other words, here you'll see that the encoded data may be this right here, but then it may actually look like this as the final one because it does a prepend of that character, and then it appends 2 more characters at the end right there. So once that's encoded, it's ready to rock and roll. Now, we're also going to bring up our T-Shark to be able to do this as well. Which is right there. So let's do some of that actually. Let's get that rocking and rolling here. So I am going to bring this up here, and we'll go to that DNS infill. And on Kali, I already have T-Shark, and this is going to generate a PCAP file for us to be able to go ahead and look at it in Wireshark so you guys can see what the records would actually look like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make an empty record, and I'm just going to call it super secret. Oops, if I can type it in correctly. Supersecret.pcap. Now, I'm using the touch command because I'm not actually adding any information into it right now. If I were to enter stuff, I would use probably the echo command or whatever. So we're just creating a text file called supersecret.pcap. Okay. Then we're going to chmod that, which is to give permissions to this particular one here. And we will do supersecret.pcap. Bing. All right, very cool. And then we'll start our T-Shark. Now, depending on what you have, I think should be ETH 0. Yeah, so that's my actual one there. So if we go back here and look right here, you're doing a T-Shark TAC-I, which is indicating the adapter that you're using, ETH 0. The TAC-W means to write to this particular file, and we're going to give it the file that we're going to be writing to. Okay, so we'll go back here, and we'll say T-Shark. And again, if you don't have T-Shark installed, go ahead and install it if you're using like an Ubuntu or whatever. For me, it's already on Kali, so we're good to go. So we'll say TAC-W, and then it's called supersecret.pcap. All right, so we're running, and it's ready to capture. And you can see right here, it only did a few at the beginning. It's really going slow. So let's go over here, and let's kick this bad boy off. So if we go back and look, the packet.py script is or packet.y script is what we're using, which is right here. So we're going to go ahead and say Python packet.y.py, and don't forget the name of the file we're trying to exfil is this one right here. Copy that. All right, so we'll ask for that name, so we'll go ahead and paste that bad boy right here. And then the domain name, in my case, it's called intelbytes.com. That's the one I own. And you can see right there, it's base 64 encoded it, and then it did a base 58 encode, and it says start transmitting. So make sure we have our T-Shark running over here, okay, which we do. And let's hit enter. Okay, you can see it's starting to work, and then come back over here, and we can see packets are capturing right here, going along pretty good. All right, so what's going to happen again, and we'll check this again in CyberChef so you guys can see kind of what it would look like when we do the infill one. I'll show you kind of the base 64, base 58 encoding. And there we go. Everything should be good to go, and yeah, so that's done. Now, if we come back here, okay, we see our T-Shark has ended. So let's go ahead and Control-C out of that. And I'm going to use Wireshark to kind of view this here. So we'll say Wireshark, what was it called? Super Secret, right? And let's go ahead. Oops. All right, let's take a peek here at some of this DNS traffic. Let's go ahead and type in DNS so we can just kind of see just the DNS traffic. All right, so take a look at some of this stuff here. So it looks like what they're doing is they're doing 20 characters prepended in this script. Now, again, you can make it whatever you want, but this person, I believe, let's go back and verify that. I think it's like 20. Oops, I think it's like 20 characters or something to that effect. I can't remember. Yeah, right here. So the string is then split into 20 character long sections. And then each section will have 3 dummy characters, blah, 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 so on and so forth. So we can see that's actually what's going on here. You can see this weird long domain, subdomain, .intelbytes.com. Then you can see right there is another one, right there's another one, right there's another one. You can see there is a ton. This should trigger a little suspicion to say, okay, this is kind of odd. Now, another thing that should trigger suspicion here is when you typically do a DNS request, there's usually another protocol that follows it. For instance, if I'm trying to go find, LeroyJenkins.com, that would be followed. The DNS request would be followed by an HTTP request to get that web page and view it. In this case, we're seeing that that's not the case. It's just DNS records. That's odd. That would be an anomaly or something at least to spark suspicion to say, hey, all these DNS records going out here, and there's no follow-up HTTP. What's the deal here? But it's all going to the same subdomain, right? Or same domain, but it's all these weird long characters, 20 characters each. That's odd, right? So that's one way that you can kind of determine, hey, something suspicious is going on here. All right, so we've done that, and we ran that. Everything's good there. And now it's Packet Grabber, I think. Yes, Packet Grabber. So now we want to go ahead and on the other side, let's say we were on the other side and we were getting this information, and now we wanted to be able to decode it on the other side, we would use the same GitHub and use this packet ygrabber.py to be able to decode what we sent. So what it will do is it will take all of these DNS records and it will assemble them, and then it will do the decode, and then we should have the full complete file again. So let's go back here, and we'll go back and do the Python. Let's see. I have short-term memory here. Packet ygrabber, that's what it was. So Python packet ygrabber. And now it's going to ask for the file that was captured, which in this case is the super secret.pcap. Okay, so we'll grab that, paste that bad boy in here. Then it's going to say the file name output. I'm just going to say, my credit-cards.txt sounds good. And then the domain name that it's associated with. So we had done the intelbytes.com. Bada bing, bada boom. So let's take a look now, and let's cat my-creditcard.txt. There it is, fully assembled. There's the information. So if you weren't monitoring for that odd anomalies that we saw there that we were talking about, then this would have been exfilled out of your company, and whoever is on the other end that's running this reassembly, if you will be able to go ahead and reassemble all of that data on their end. And they used it through DNS, and they just split it up into all these multiple different DNS requests and sneaked it on out of your company. So mindful of this. And we'll talk more about some detection methods at the end of this video. All right, so let's get into the infill part of it. So anyways, I think that one is done. Let's see, let's go back here. Make sure we don't have anything else that we need to do. Nope. Okay, so now let's talk about DNS infiltration. So in this particular case, the scenario again is that you've compromised a victim machine, and you want to be able to make what they call a C2, something like a C2, which would be a command and control server, if you will. So if you have certain commands that you want to be able to run, and you want to be able to sneak those commands into the company, so that you can assemble them as a script and run them. It's very similar, like if I were to compromise a Linux machine, what a lot of times bad guys will do is they'll go to a temp directory, right? A TMP directory, because sometimes those are world writable. And let's say they've determined that you're using, Apache HTTP server that's vulnerable, and they find on exploitdb a exploit script. And they need to get that exploit script downloaded onto the victim machine so they can compile it and then run it and exploit the machine. Those are sometimes caught by, tooling that you're using or that your company may be using, or a firewall or what have you. So we're going to try to do something similar, pull in a command, and we're going to do it through DNS so that we're not detected. So kind of a C2, if you will. And we're going to do it using TXT records. Now, it's not a malicious command we're going to run, but it's just a command that we're going to show that you can compile and make. Use whatever command that you want, but in this particular case, the command they're using is not malicious. It's just getting the OS version, I think. That's what it is. I'm pretty sure. So in this particular case, what we're going to do is we're going to look here at my Google domains, and what I've done is I have my intelbytes.com. What I did is I made a custom record, right? So I went to manage custom record, and what I did is I made a new record. So down here, create new record. And what I did is I just called it code as my subdomain. I made the type of TXT, and then I left this TTL the way it is, and then I put this data in here. Now, if we were to take this data, let's copy it real quick here, and let's go over to CyberChef. If you're not familiar with CyberChef, man, you should be. It's crazy. I love it. So I'm going to put this input in. Now, knowing the way that this person made this script, I know they do a base 64 encode, then a base 58 encode. So we have to do the reverse of that to see the actual command. So we have to do a base 58 decode. So let's go ahead and do a recipe for base 58. So I'm going to say from base 58. And that gives me this value here. I'm going to copy that. Okay, and replace this with that. And let me get rid of this recipe here. And now we'll say from base 64. And you can see the command is import OS, semicolon, print OSU name, right? So that's what we're going to be, that's our malicious command, as it were. All right, so in this particular one here, we're using this packet simple PY to be able to go ahead and do that. But if you wanted to not use any of these other scripts here, you can just basically do the NS lookup for it. So what I mean by that is if I go back here and I say NS lookup, and then I say tech type equals txt, and it was code.intelbytes.com. Okay, so if I just did this, there it is, right? So I see it. So what you can do is you can actually just keep copying it here, and you can do this other command that I've got already, as you can see here. I'm grepping. By the way, this pipe symbol here is meaning saying whatever the results of the first command is, take those results and put it into this next command. So we're saying whatever you get for a result, in other words, all of this, okay, do this next part. So I'm just grepping on the first one, that YE, so it finds that line, if you will. So we're going to say grep on the YE, and then we're going to do another pipe, and we're going to say cut tag D, and where we want to cut at is where the quotation is, and field number 2, which would be the actual value that we see there. And I've already called it mal.py, so I'll just say mal2.py. So we're actually taking it and putting it into this mal2.py script here, if you will. Let's see. That's all we need to do. Yep, I think that's pretty good. And next what we want to do is, because this mal2.py, it will only basically have this value. So if we were to look at it, mal2.py, you can see it's just that value. So they've given us a script, this one here, I think it is, that will do that whole base 58 decode, base 64 decode. So I'm just following what they had in the Try Hack Me room. So packet Y, and it's simple. Simple. You know what? I need to do Python, don't I? Python through Python E, and it was packet Y simple py. All right, so it's asking for the file name. In this particular case, it was mal2.py, and should be done. So now if we go ahead and cat mal2.py, it's that command, right? So now if we run Python 3 mal2.py, it runs the command. Now, obviously replace it with whatever malicious commands that you want. But either way, I was able to grab that information and pass it to me through DNS records. So they call that, typically would call that like infiltration, if you will. But again, these are all predicated on the fact that a person's already compromised the victim within the domain, and they're on the machine and they're trying to do some post-exploitation activity here. This is where this is kind of reliant on. Now, I'm sure you could probably social engineer some sort of tactic for this, but either way, that is how you do DNS infill and exfil with this particular script here. Okay, so it's a really good room to run. Now, I couldn't get the DNS tunnel one to run very well, so I never finished it yet. But they use iodine, which is another way. I'll just show you what it looks like here. Iodine comes in two forms. One's called iodine D, and then iodine. Iodine D is the server. So on the server end, you would actually run iodine D, in this case here, and then a port number, and then this is a tunnel address. 10, it's just whatever private range you want. They just picked one at random. This one happened to be 10.0.0.1. And then they made the actual domains themselves. Now for me, I actually did make those as well. As you can see right there, I made a record, this one here, for DNS ton IP, and then I did the name server that points to it. So I mean, you could do something similar as what they're doing here as well. But essentially what they're saying is that you're just using this to create a tunnel, and this is what people will do to get past Wi-Fi blocks or just blocks in general at their workplace. They just tunnel out and do whatever, and they're doing it in this case through DNS. But one I really like is DNS Cat 2. That one's one of my favorites. So let's go take a peek at that here. So DNS Cat 2. This one here is a really cool C2 type of tool. So you can see here the tool is designed to create an encrypted command and control channel over the DNS protocol, which is an effective tunnel out of almost every network. So this is pretty awesome stuff here. Whoever made this did a really, really good job. So it comes in two parts. Again, you have a client and you have a server. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate it on a DigitalOcean server that I have. And I'm going to run the server on that one, and then I'm also going to connect to it through a Windows machine to show you this can be done on Windows as well. So you can get the downloads here if you're going to be doing it on Windows. You can find it there. You can find the one for Linux. So what I've done here is I've actually booted up my Ubuntu, and you can see I'm in my DNS Cat server area. So right there, you can see I've got my Ruby script. And this is, by the way, built in Ruby. So if you're not familiar with Ruby, they use something called gems. Very similar to like how pip is for dependencies. Ruby relies on this sort of thing. So I've already got the commands done so I can do it quickly. So what I'm doing here is I'm running this Ruby dnscat.rb. I'm pointing to the DNS host. Now this host in this case here is my actual DigitalOcean VPS that I spun up. And again, you can spin these up like $4, $7, I think, for a real small Ubuntu server or something like that to just run tests like this. So typically I'll do it just for testing things, whatever. So here we're using the command tac-tac-DNS, and then the host equals the IP address is the DigitalOcean one, comma port equals 53. In this case, I'm just going to stick with the regular normal 53 because I don't want suspicion to be aroused for those that it may be monitoring. The tac-tac security equals open. For some reason, when I was doing it, it says on the site that it's supposed to be encrypted by default, the client, but it wasn't. And so I was running into problems. So other than just spending all day troubleshooting that, I decided there's an option to do security equals open so that this session won't be encrypted. I don't highly recommend that, but it's just for demo purposes. I'm just going to do security equals open in this case here, okay? So we'll go ahead and hit enter. And we can see there we're running on DNS Cat, and looks like we should be good to go. Looks like you didn't go domain to record. Okay, so I think we're pretty good to go. And yep, okay. I think everything should be good to go, and it's running right there on the server. So let's go back here now to our Windows. Now, one thing to point out is that Windows Defender does detect this and block it and remove it, which is awesome. Big props to Defender on this because there is some other big name EDRs and AVs out there that do not. And they basically say that they don't find it to be malicious. So just keep that in mind, that Defender does indeed find this as malicious, does block it, does quarantine it. So to do the demo, I turned off real-time protection. Okay. So we can see here, I've got my Win32exe for DNS Cat. And let's go to our command. Oh, where is it at? All right, so in this case here, let's go ahead and navigate over to that. Oops. Good if I did a CD on that, I suppose. All right, and then from there, we'll do our DNS Cat 236. And then I think it is, oh, I'm trying to remember now. Let's see if I remember what no, that's not the right one. I'm trying to remember now what the command is. Let's go back and look at their page. Okay, DNS cat 2. Trying to remember now. I think it's just, I don't know if they have the Windows version in this one or not. I think it's just the host equals. I believe that's what it is. So let's go ahead and verify. Let's go back here again. I think it's hosts and then the IP address, which would be 142.93.1. So 142.93.250.196. I believe that is the correct syntax. Yes. Okay. Awesome. All right. So you can see here, it's just kind of sitting around waiting for things, but it's essentially connected to the actual tunnel that's on, it should be connected to the tunnel that I have over on my DigitalOcean. So let's go over here. Let's take a peek. All right, so it says here, new window created equals 1. So what we're going to do is say window, tac I, 1. And what that will now do is put us in the window or the session. It's very similar to like Meterpreter where you do a session tac I, 1. In this case, let's do a help and see what we can actually run for C2 commands. Okay, so we have a variety of commands we can do like download, echo, exec, listen, ping, right? All that kind of stuff. Let's do an exec real quick just to verify that it's working. Make sure we don't have Notepad up over there. We'll just pop Notepad and see what happens. Okay, we don't have Notepad running. Cool. So let's come back over here. So we'll say exec notepad.exe. Boom. All right, let's go check it out. And there it is. Poppity pop, pop, pop. It looks like we have our C2. Loving it. Very cool. All right, so here you can see command. So this is the command exec that it ran. So this should be detected, I would hope, by different tooling that you're using, security tooling. I can say, based on some tests I've run, it's not going to be detected by some EDR and some AV out there. I won't name names to disparage anybody, but I can tell you that it's not always the case. So you may want to test this in your own company, your own network, to verify whether your tooling, because it's always important to test your own tooling that you're using, right? Don't just check a box and say, hey, I got this AV or this EDR for audit purposes and yada. Test it. Put it through its paces. And if it doesn't work, put a ticket in with them and say, hey, player, what's going on? Why is this not working? So it's always important to test it and see, does your actual company detect this sort of thing? Okay. So, and does it block it? Now, we know for a fact that I would never have gotten to this point if it was a basic Windows Defender machine, because Defender would have blocked it and removed the executable from it completely. So I wouldn't have been able to run it anyways. So that would have been a mitigating factor in this case. And again, I'm not being paid or anything by Defender. I'm just telling you for a fact that Defender blocked it and removed it. So that is one mitigation, I guess we could say. Another thing, let's talk about the detections here. Is this a really good site, and I'll put this in the notes in the description. This article or this PDF here about detecting DNS tunneling is really good. They really have some good techniques because you're not typically going to find a lot of tooling that will do this by default. And there's a lot of EDRs and a lot of monitoring tools, SIMs as such, that do it by default. Now there is, like, for instance, Zeek is an open source, excuse me, a monitoring tool that has a DNS tunneling module, I think. Let's see, DNS dash, I think it's called DNS dash tunneling, something like that. Yeah, right here, DNS dash tunnels. So Zeek is one that has this particular module here that you can do. But I think Splunk also has something as well. Detection of DNS tunnels, yes. Oh, deprecated technology detection. Okay, well, maybe not. Anyways, regardless, there are some tools that do it and have rules built in. There's some where you'll have to make the rules. And you're thinking, well, how am I going to make the rules? Well, that's what this document is for, is to give you some idea of the methodology mindset of what you're going to be looking for. We won't go through all of them, but we'll just hit some high points here. So one is payload analysis, the size and request of the response. If you're doing like a regular DNS request to, LeroyJenkins.com, that's a pretty small record. It's just LeroyJenkins.com. It's the A record. Boom, good to go. If it's like 20 characters long, or in DNSCat's case, I think it's a lot longer that they do it in, that's an anomaly in some cases, right? Or at least something that should alert your suspicion. Now, it's not always the case. And something you have to kind of remember when you do this sort of detection is like if you are reaching out to CDNs. CDNs typically have a really long address. So that could be something that you need to keep in mind when you make this detection, to maybe filter out for CDN traffic, because those tend to be pretty long as well. So do remember that. Entropy of host names. Says DNS tunnels can be detected based on entropy of requested host names. So legitimate DNS names like LeroyJenkins.com, those are typical, dictionary type of words that you may see, Google.com or, PotatoGun.com or something like that. Those are typical known dictionary kind of words. Not a lot of times do you see DNS names with a lot of numbers, or, because if I had generated with the base 64 encode a lot of numbers in the actual name, that would be something that would increase the entropy of it, and that would be something that I would be looking for, is increased entropy of host names, say, because it's not typical that you'll see that for legitimate DNS names. Statistical analysis, in this case here, looking at the percentage of numerical characters, just what I was mentioning there. That would be an example of one. Let's see, uncommon record types, TXT. TXT is not a very common one because you're just querying to get information about a domain or whatever, but typically you'll see like A record, PTR records, those sort of things, right? MX records for mail. It's not common to see TXT, so filtering for just TXT and saying, hey, I'm going to do a little extra double check on these bad boys just to see if they're trying to do DNS infill or exfil. Specific signatures, I suppose, that's getting right into it. I guess if you had a snort signature for DNSCat2 or something like that, sure, if that's what you have. Traffic analysis, again, in this one here, we saw multiple ones going out to intelbytes.com in a very short amount of time, like a minute and a half. We sent a ton of those, and they were all 20 characters prepended, and they were all to intelbytes.com. So, hey, that's statistically something that I was going, that's a little odd. And additionally, there was nothing that followed up to it. There was no HTTP request after it that happened. So that's another one that you can look to detect, is saying, is there a lot of DNS records to one domain, but there is no follow-up protocol? It sounds like they're just probing DNS kind of stuff, right? Volume of DNS traffic per domain, per IP address. Number of host names per domain for a given domain can be an indicator. In this case, the length that we were talking about before with the odd named ones. The domain history is an interesting one. So this is more of an investigative after the fact type of thing, because you can say, I found it kind of odd, so let me just go ahead and look at this intelbytes.com, because this is whole mess of stuff I'm looking at is really odd. And then you look at intelbytes.com and you see it was created 3 days ago. Okay. Hey, was it just created to do the exfil and infill? I'm wondering. So those are some ways to do it. Geographic location would be an example of one. Do you do business in this geographic area? Should we be querying out to there? Those sort of things. So they have a lot of different methods they talk about. They go a little more in detail here, but those are some high points to think about when you're doing it. But I'll put a link to this article in the description. But either way, this is definitely something that can be seen as a gap if you're not testing for it and you're not checking it. And I'm going to go ahead and close out of my stuff here. If you're not checking for it, it's important that you test your tool and to see, does it detect this? If it doesn't, I need to make rules for it, because this is the hotness for bad guys to do their data exfil and infill, because in this current day and age, the ransomware mindset is not so much geared on encryption anymore. It is still, but not as much. It's now more on data exfil and selling selling secrets and selling data. And to do that, they have to get the data out. And this is one method they'll probably use, or at least attempt, because they're guessing that you're not going to be monitoring this. So try to see if you have a SIM that can aggregate the DNS logs and then make some rules to say, hey, I'm going to look at the DNS logs and verify, certain things like that. Or, if you're using Zeek, which is an open source one, I see that I haven't tested it. I've never used it, so I can't say it works. I'm just telling you that's on cursory research. I saw that they had a module for it. But if it works well and it detects it, maybe think about implementing something like that. But either way, just preparing you so that you're ready for anything, because you don't want to be popped by these ransomware guys. You don't want them to knocking on your door and saying, pop, 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 another server drop, because that's not good. But until next time, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to go ahead and subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you liked the video, go ahead and click on like as well, and then hit the notification bells for any videos that I'll be dropping. And this one here will be under the Pop, 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 another server drop series channel playlist. And I'll be kind of fluctuating between this series and Intel Bytes, which is another one I do in the YouTube channel. So if you guys enjoy it, let me know, and leave some comments and say, hey, Player, this is some killer stuff, or hey, this sucks. Either way, let me know in the comments what you guys think. Until next time, peace out, players.